Hi everyone, thank you for joining our live webinar on how to integrate medical device cybersecurity expectation to your QMS. And sorry for the late start of webinar because of clock change. There was some confusion. So now we are starting this webinar 30 minutes late. I hope all of you are doing great and staying safe in the pandemic situation. We are doing series of webinars from last 6 months on different topics to spread some values in medical device industry. We had requested Cyberacta and John to do this webinar because of large number of requests we received from our attendees. Let me tell you some important points related to this webinar. All participants will be muted during the live webinar session. You can note your questions during the live webinar and ask them after the webinar ends. Or you can also mail your questions to us or John. We will be happy to share a soft copy of webinar and a recorded version of this webinar to all our attendees. You can also find a recorded version of this webinar and our other webinars on our website which is www.saracasolutions.com. So now I'm requesting John to introduce himself and let's start the webinar.
Good afternoon, good morning, everybody. I'm sorry for the confusion and delay. John Jancides with Cyberacta. Really trying for this one to introduce some basic elements as pertains to cybersecurity on medical devices and software as medical devices, and really just provide a fundamental roadmap on how to best integrate some of the expectations, regulatory expectations that exist right now, whether it's going to be FDA, HealthCanada, EMA, or TGA, for example, and really just provide kind of what we see in our engagement with other clients, and what are some of the elements that would be important to consider as far with this journey, especially with the transition and expectation of EU MDR next year in May. There's a lot of interest and confusion in terms of what are those steps that need to take place. So with that being said, and to Ankit's point, feel free, I'll try to make it as interactive as possible, but feel free to type your questions and we can go through that at the end. And obviously, if you have any more questions beyond that, I'm more than happy to take them after the end of the webinar. So in the meantime, let me share my screen. Let's see. Okay. Let's see. Okay. So let's see, where is it? Slideshow. Okay. Okay, let me know if you guys can see it.
John, we can see it.
Okay, great. So we'll start our journey, and really just kind of a reminder for everybody. I mean, it's more of a just kind of set up a foundation. I'm sure everybody's aware of what a QMS is, but I just want to make sure we have some of the parameters there. At least from a U.S. standpoint, that has been effective since '97. Just most of the requirements, if not all, are really are not prescriptive, and really what the FDA is requiring is more of a framework for the manufacturers to follow, and that's a similar process we're gonna apply when it comes to cybersecurity. You know, some of the elements that we need to consider is that a QMS is to commensurate with the risk presented by the device, the complexity of the manufacturing process, any of the activities, manufacturing, testing, quality, that need to be considered, and really anything related to the size and complexity of the design and the manufacturing itself. As a quick reminder, again, the 7 subsystems that we're going to cover in this walkthrough, from design to materials to facility, kappa, production process controls. one thing is, and we'll go through as in more detail, is what is that leadership and organizational structure that supports the governance of the QMS, and really as we go through the life cycle processes, what are the requirements, what's the design and development activities, all the way to maintenance and servicing, and ultimately should the device be withdrawn from the market, what's the decommissioning process. So let's get to the kind of the meat of the matter in terms of the cybersecurity of QMS. What is cybersecurity? So my background, I'm an engineer by training. I'm a lawyer by education. Really worked in the medical device for about 25 years now, both in quality and regulatory compliance, all pertaining to software. But still, cybersecurity is one of those, I would say, new concepts, especially in our industry. But it really refers to those types of security challenges that have progressed as we become more and more reliant on software, and really is, at least in my opinion, is all those measures that an organization can take to protect critical business systems, software, devices, any data communications that may be subject or vulnerable to cyber threats. And ultimately, medical device cybersecurity is just a subset of the cybersecurity measures that a medical device manufacturer needs to consider. One of the things that and I've added this slide is we got some preliminary questions about this training or this webinar is, kind of what are the hot topics when it comes to cybersecurity, especially as clients receive additional information requests from the FDA as part of their submission, or with EU MDR and the notified bodies. So for us is what we see is really those three key questions that need to be considered as we go forward, which is what is the intended use of the device, and whether that use itself will make it vulnerable to risks associated with the device itself. In essence, how will be the device connected? Will it transmit data? And then the questions as it pertains to the manufacturer is that how you guys are going to manage the risk themselves. And as part of this risk management activity are there any known vulnerabilities that may lead to a compromise related to the health and safety of the user, either the patient or the operator? The second question is really that the cyber risk management or cyber risk assessment is how do you consider those risks as part of a foreseeable misuse of that particular device? And have you considered, have you taken any steps in considering or eliminating those risks? So really what they're asking for is the activities that have been taken from a design standpoint, what's called security by design, and really as soon as the product goes to the market, how does the manufacturer demonstrate surveillance of those risks and how they're communicated to the users or customers? And then kind of goes back to a key point that, especially with software, is really how exactly is the manufacturer develop patches or updates to the software, how they're being deployed, and how exactly are they being verified? So that's some of those three key topics or questions that are coming up again and again and again as part of this transition that the regulatory agencies are including there. And really, just from an overall activity, their main concern is the risk of failure. It's what would happen if there's a vulnerability that may cause a device, either a diagnostic or a medical device or a companion diagnostic, whatever the case may be, anything that runs software. And as we're going forward, cybersecurity has become that really of paramount importance in the development, approval, and commercialization of those devices. I mean, some countries are more strict than others in terms of what they're expecting, but all of them, if I were to reduce it down, they're expecting a holistic, risk-based approach, end-to-end, from design, from manufacturing, from deployment, maintaining, and servicing of those medical devices. Specifically for the FDA, just and I'll add a couple different flavors. If you have any questions for a particular country, let me know. We'll be more than happy to share that with you. Really, what their scope is very broad. That really pertains to any hardware, software, or programmable logic. Must be reasonably secure from intrusion and misuse. It has to talk about availability, reliability, and the correct operation. The device itself is performing as intended. And the last point, it's very important for clients or folks that they're getting into software within medical devices, is that their expectation or FDA's expectation is based on the NIST cybersecurity framework. So that become important and paramount as we're going through this walkthrough. From an EU MDR, that is pretty much the first time that, from an enforcement standpoint, is that cybersecurity or information security is plainly embedded as a requirement. And I've highlighted some pertinent sections that apply within EU MDR in software, and more importantly, either IVDR or MDR. And really, the expectation is that the medical device manufacturers, as the ones that know the device the best, that know how it's being used. So the expectation is they will develop the requirements, the processes, the features to make sure that it's important that we cover those elements to protect from unauthorized access, aka information security, aka cybersecurity. Now, from a cybersecurity integration, this is something that having done this for both in-house and for other firms, it's important to consider. It's not going to be an easy transition, but it's really how do you develop your plan to get there. So really, just kind of the best practices that we communicate to our clients, and really how we help them present to the regulatory bodies. And as we're going in, it's a key point. It's not necessarily covered here, but I want to make sure you guys are aware is that more and more buyers relying or expecting to see a cybersecurity framework as part of this device process. And especially, obviously, the FDA is working on issuing what they call SBOMs or CBOMs, compliance bill of materials, or cybersecurity bill of materials. In essence, is a software bill of materials. And similarly in Europe, there's a recent guidance from a procurement standpoint for hospitals or health clinics to evaluate cybersecurity as part of that procurement process. So that doesn't stop. So obviously it doesn't stop just with the FDA, but actually it slowly is extending to the customer. So going back to the integration, a manufacturer or designer has to have a strategy to address the cybersecurity risk of any medical device that runs software code. And that strategy is to be based on 4 points. How do we assess the maturity of that medical device security program within your QMS? What are those specific cybersecurity practices in the design, development, and deployment of those medical devices? How do we handle complaints? Again, like everybody else, the regulatory bodies rely on complaint management, so it's important to understand how exactly do we discern and evaluate those complaints relating to any incidents that may come up or vulnerabilities that we discover. And last but not least is how do we manage risk throughout this life cycle of any medical technology. So it's important. So there's 4 pillars that we need to be aware of, and those are some of those elements that we need to consider. So what I want to provide, again, it's a busy slide, but it's important to include it in, is a very high level, and you know, for every company it's a little bit different because the starting point may be different for depending upon the products or the systems that they have. But from a high level standpoint, there's and trying to guide some of our customers and clients is that there's 5 buckets that we need to start with, and those are when it comes to management
John,
review, control.
John,
yes,
sorry for the interruption. Can you make it a full screen? We are not able to see the text.
Let me see if I can do it.
Short screen. Yeah.
Let's see. Is that going to be?
I think you can check in the display settings. Just.
Is it easier now?
I think also if users can shrink the bar up above where you can see the participants, that makes the slide bigger also.
Okay. Let's see.
Yeah, you can just.
Is it working better? No.
Yeah, screen. You can select that option from there.
No,
you can just select display setting and.
Line. Turn off the next slide showing.
Okay, hold on a second. All right.
Yeah.
Let's see, where is it? Hold on a second. I'll put this over here. I'll put this over here. Okay, so let me change this one. Let me see how. Where is it? Hide presenter view. How does it? Oh, that doesn't do it. Screen. Okay.
So essentially, if I can just talk to this for a second while John's fixing the slides, you know, what we're trying to present today. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Just while John's fiddling with that a little bit, one of the messages we want to present today is that the cybersecurity is very important, but it's not that unique, right? And there's the slides. It's not that unique.
This is good, John. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. Excellent. I'm glad you, Jim, you're able to join as well.
It's really not that unique. What John will get back to in a second is we're following all the same quality system elements, all the same processes that we've done in many other areas. But now it's time to integrate something relatively new in cybersecurity. John?
Yeah, so exactly. So it's really is, and as you go, is we're going to try to show today. Again, this is kind of an introductory webinar. Is like, you know, trying to put all the high elements. Is that there's five buckets that we need to consider, and really what we're trying to guide our folks, and really just it's being a reflection of what the customers are expecting, whether it's going to be a hospital or a clinic or a regulatory agency, is those questions that, again, I try to distill to a single slide, and I do apologize if it wasn't visible before. But really, from a management standpoint, the question you're going to get is, do you have a product security function in place? That is a very much a clear view, a starting point with a lot of the customers. That do you have an established security process, and then kind of what are the elements associated with it, and then kind of what is the expectation? Similar with the FDA or other regulatory agencies, they want to see cybersecurity as part of management review. What are the metrics? You know, how do you evaluate it? So those some of the key elements from a management standpoint. From risk management now, it's really goes back to that integration, and Jim Isaacson will go into more detail on that one. But really, how exactly have you incorporated or embedded or infused cyber risk management within the existing product risk management that exists right now? From a design control, plain and simple is, what are the requirements right now when it comes to design input for having a secure product? What are the activities or the standards that you apply when it pertains to hardening the system? Hardening is a term of art as used in cybersecurity to make sure that the system is more robust or be able to sustain an attack. And really, what is the security testing? And this is important. The FDA and again, a lot of the agencies want to see an actual attempt to do pen tests and evaluate what is the risks that or should have known for that matter. So an overall brings about that robustness during development. There are more specific questions for Germany, for BfArM, for instance. I believe there is 162 questions that BfArM asks in addition or beyond EUMDR for anything that relates to any system that runs code, and specifically to cybersecurity. So, and they go into much more detail than what other countries are expecting. So that's something to kind of be aware of. From a customer complaints, again, really, how exactly are you discern cybersecurity issues from the rest of any product issues, and more importantly, how are you going to communicate those fixes once you do them back to the customer and to the regulatory agencies? Again, kind of the linchpin of a QMS is a kappa, and we've seen that. This is the last slide is really taken from questions that clients of ours have been asked by different agencies. So, and I'll make sure that everybody kind of gets that back, is to say that what are the clear criteria on how you remediate risk for products in development. So that's very important. They want to see what is the criteria, what is the process to remediate those risks in development. Secondarily is same exact questions, but products that they're actually commercialized. So what do you do? What is the criteria for remediating products they're already in the market? So what is the process? What's the activity? And then as a subset of that is the expectation, and this is where a lot of companies get caught in the middle. Is that as of right now, the expectation is that medium to critical vulnerabilities, as the manufacturers define them, they have to be communicated within 30 days. Is either actually have a fix, or at least communicate that you have a plan to fix it within 30 days. For a low to medium vulnerabilities, the expectation is about 60 days, 60 to 90, but more and more kind of moves down to 60. So if we go back to kappa 101, those agencies have established the timeliness that is expected to conduct an investigation, being able to find a root cause and deploy the corrective or preventative actions that apply. So it's important to understand that and go from there. Let's see, next slide. Here we go. So, and then I'll pass on to Jim to really, oops, come on. Here we go. Security by design.
Don, did you want me to take this?
I can take this, and then you can go to the next
Why
one.
don't you take this, and I'll pick it up at the next.
So really, security by design, and you'll hear it a lot from different different agencies. FDA talks about it. Certain hospitals are talking about it. Is really those activities that drive the implementation of secure software development, and this goes into the medical device itself. So we're going into what are those starting, do we have the uniform and binding requirements for implementation that demonstrates that our product is state of the art. For instance, how do we set up and select trusted tools? How do we separate software units? How do we track software units? And what are we using for safe and secure programming techniques and tools? A lot of the question is from security by design is, how do we go about boundaries? How do we go beyond the interface of the medical device to the body, whether it's going to be a Wi-Fi or how it's connected, how the data flows? So, and understand what is the intended operating environment. So if we're developing a device that is to be used in a hospital, what is our intended operating environment? Do we know what that is, how we tested that? Or if it's going to be used by a user, let's say it's a wearable medical device. Do we know how the device will behave as the user moves about their home, their work? Again, with COVID, not so much outside, but at least those particular areas. And then we're going through what are those test sections. I mean, testing is important. We're going kind of backwards to look at that holistic cybersecurity assessment. So what are we looking at? And then I've seen it more and more that we're going into the actual code evaluation. Who is actually looking at the software code itself for any vulnerabilities? A lot with the advent of GitHub and using code that is commonly available. How exactly are you looking for that for those vulnerabilities? So then, last but not least, software components. How are you looking for known vulnerabilities? How you do buffer overflows, especially in the development process, and then ultimately as you're going through patching and updates, how do you demonstrate that? So Jim, let me see, get over to you.
Yeah, so how do we integrate this into the design control process? What I really want to do in a couple minutes today is try and demystify this, because especially for medical devices, we have that design process down. It's very well defined, and when followed, it works very, very well. Design controls is really agnostic to whatever features or protections or requirements you have, right? And so we don't need a completely different system to address cybersecurity areas. Whether if you're talking about biocompatibility, yes, there's a variety of tests and things that have to be done. They're very unique to biocompatibility that you don't see, say, in a leak test that you have to perform, right? Cybersecurity is no different. You're going to have some very unique requirements and unique tests that have to be done there. But the process you're going to use to develop these security measures and to verify and to validate these security measures are all the same. Could be EMC, EMI. There's already in the medical device arena, you already know of a variety of technologies that your one design control and risk management processes is addressing. Cybersecurity is just one other of those to have in there. So what do we need? Various users. There's going to be a lot of different, potentially more than one, potentially a number of users that are going to be using your product or your system. We need to understand what their requirements are. Not only to use the system, to be able to have authorized access, if you want to call it that, right? Mm-hmm. And we can talk about that in terms of usability or human factors engineering, but also the protective measures from a cybersecurity standpoint. So you're going to have authorized users that you need to have them be able to use your product reasonably efficiently, and you're going to want to block out the unauthorized users. So there's various needs that we really need to understand that very, very well right at the front. Understand those requirements that come from standards. Understand from your risk management. John talked a lot about risk management. we need to understand what control measures we need to put in place to mitigate risks that have been identified, okay? Once we do that, once we go through our design element, it's very important to have a good verification plan that appropriately challenges all of these design inputs, right? And then we're going to have, and the verification, of course, is going to be challenging your engineering-based requirements. You're again going to have your user needs, which are generally pretty qualitative, spoken in relative layman's terms for the user. You're going to translate those into very technical engineering requirements that you're going to verify. Once you verify that technically you think your product works as intended, you're going to go in and do your design validation to make sure that you've done the right product and to make sure that, again, the authorized users can access the product easily where they need to, and that unauthorized users will not have the access that they should not have. And again, with cybersecurity in particular, depending on your product, depending on your users, this can be a tight marriage with human factors, which may seem contradictory, but they can coexist very well if done right up front. John, next slide. So John talked a bit about risk, and risk management, as you know, goes hand in hand with design controls. And this is best done, obviously, very, very upfront in the process, commensurate with understanding who your users are and what their needs are. We need upfront to decide to determine, you know, the risks of the product. What are the potential harms, right? What are the potential hazardous situations? What are the hazards, right? What's the intended use of the medical device, okay? An example that I've heard a number of times, you've probably heard as well, that I like to understand the difference between a hazard, a hazardous situation, and a harm, is if you're on a dock in front of the ocean and there's a shark in the ocean, okay? The shark is a hazard, okay? There's no hazardous situation while you're on the dock whatsoever, okay? There isn't a hazardous situation until you jump off that dock and get into the water with the shark. Now you've got a hazardous situation, and the shark may or may not catch you before you get back to shore. What's that chance of a harm occurring? Of course, the harm being that encounter, that physical encounter with the shark. So that's a good example I like to use to understand the differences between all those nuanced terms. But we're going to go through risk management with this cybersecurity, no different than other aspects of a medical device. And we're going to identify those vulnerabilities. And from those vulnerabilities, we're going to score them. We're going to evaluate those risks, find out, relatively speaking, what is unacceptable, what's intolerable, what's relatively acceptable, or as low as reasonably we can get to. And we're going to put in control measures. We're going to put in risk mitigations. Those are going to turn, those risk mitigations, those control measures are going to feed into your design inputs. So you're going to learn of new design inputs that you need to design into your system to prevent unwanted penetration into your system from a cybersecurity standpoint. And then you're going to follow up on it. You're going to do your verification, validation, as we talked about, and see if indeed you've mitigated those risks. And it's a full cycle thing that's going to work later, as John talked about with product complaints. We're going to learn of new things. We're not going to catch everything, and that's okay. But as we learn new things, we need to update our risk management file. We're going to have to update our design. We're going to have to make some software changes to patch some holes that we weren't previously aware of. John?
And then we're going on to kind of one of the fun topics that, you know, we're talking about kappas, on really kind of what the agencies expect from a kappa is really in kind of just 5 elements that we need really understand is the vulnerabilities in any device that is connected that just happen every day. It's just a matter of fact. I think it's on us, it's on the manufacturers to really communicate or understand and communicate their impact appropriately, and really going out to deploying a patch or a solution, that's going to be important to understand that. And really, the last but not least is what is expected is that the manufacturer of medical devices are obligated, and this is where what we see more and more, whether it's going to be directly to the customers or through an agency, that they carry out those measures and communicate them to their users to make sure the user is aware of what's taking place. So, but the process is still the same. You still have to use a kappa process to do that. So it's just simply another step, another element that needs to be considered. And I keep harping on that one. It just, we need to have, from a cyber kappa or companies that have a lot of software or devices running software or IVDR, is understand is, we need those processes for communicating with third-party vendors in the event of finding vulnerabilities of their products. So have that established, cleared out. What are the contact individuals? If they have a question, you may get a question from a customer, and you need to know sub vendor A or B or C, who exactly is the person to ask that, and then really, have the process for detecting, reporting, and evaluating anything related to cyber. Pretty much established. Secondarily, what is the criteria? What's the reporting channels? They're asking for a communication process to make sure that is in place. And then, really just again, how do we establish both in-house and how do we establish that with our customers? So that's kind of what, if we're to kind of present a high level expectation from a cyber kappa, that would be it. Let's go to the next one. Another topic to consider as part of your maintenance and servicing process is really cyber has to be included, especially, and this is what we've seen it again and again and again. If a client or manufacturer allows or has the capability of conducting remote maintenance or remote monitoring, that's a kind of red flag for the regulators and the customers that there is a inherent vulnerability associated with that activity. So we need to know, and to Jim's point, include that in our design and either verification or validation, whatever the risk management process dictates to do, on how we're going to do that, and what's the activity, what's the process, and then some of the questions that we're seeing is that what's the limit that somebody can do a remote maintenance? What is the access that they can have to? Especially as you're going into there was a recent recall, fairly big recall by a well-known medical device manufacturer in the U.S., where as part of their remote maintenance, folks were allowed to look or had access, for that matter, to patient data, and that is a no-no under privacy and GDPR. So the fines. Go ahead, Jim.
Finish your sentence, John. I just want to jump in with another point.
So that was one of the recent recalls where they had to do a massive recall in Europe because of GDPR, because the fines associated with that data breach, it's about 4% of your global revenue. So it made an absolute sense for them to go ahead and pull or address that particular vulnerability out of their system. Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, the other thing I want to point out here that we don't want to we don't want to let slide by without too much notice is design change, which we haven't spoken too much about. But as we're having to do these patches, as we're having to do these software upgrades, profoundly important that you go through a design change process, which of course is very similar. It's a sidecar, if you will, to design controls. But what we're doing is we're temporarily coming out of the manufacturing space, if you will, re-entering design controls, reevaluating those user needs, reevaluating those design inputs, making sure you go back through, as John said, that verification, validation before you push your change out to the field. And trying to shortcut that in the interest of time and not catching some of the bugs can also land you in a recall situation. John?
Correct. No, very good point, Jim. And really what kind of, as we get into the end of what we're trying to put it together, is really what I want to make sure folks at least have on their deployment plan or integration plan, really just the four processes that may or may not be standard before, but it's something that from a legal standpoint, you're going to see more and more of them being required, and from a regulatory compliance standpoint. So really, the first one is post-market vigilance. So we know about post-market surveillance. This is different. This is about tracking, assessing, and responding to newly discovered vulnerabilities of your product, not necessarily what the customer is saying about your product. This is evaluating, constantly looking for any vulnerabilities that may have been discovered, either by your vendors, by your suppliers, by your competitors. So this is going to be very important to have a process to demonstrate that you're vigilant in terms of your cybersecurity practices. The other one is patching, as Jim mentioned. Is a lot of folks do patching now on a certain process. Now patching is to be part of that, or the patching process has to include an evaluation of risk as it pertains to cyber, and really what is the threshold. If you define, for instance, you identify a vulnerability that was not previously discovered. So what is the process to evaluate it? How you're going to patch it? And then the next two is how you're going to disclose it. What is the process that you're going to disclose the process to the customers? And more and more hospitals are requiring that disclosure, so to make sure that their systems are up to speed and they're secure. And then last but not least, you'll see it, the FDA slowly is moving to this information sharing, is really how do we as an industry get together to make sure that we're sharing this information, so make sure that everybody is it's secure in their devices. So if we found something in a particular system that, let's say an operating system that other manufacturers did not, the push by the regulators is that you are to disclose that to your competitors. It sounds rather it's a new concept, but ultimately it pertains to the safety of a patient or a user. So they really want to make sure that industry professionals, they share that information so everybody can make sure can take those steps associated with that security. And really, I just want to kind of give an example of what device vulnerability management looks like, and kind of what to look for. Is kind of first and foremost is really understanding what your vendors, who the vendors are, ask them for the SBOMs, ask them for software bill of materials, and really look into if they have any updates on their websites. You may have to do this on a monthly basis, you may have to do weekly, depending upon what is the risk of the device. Look at any government agencies. There's governmental agencies in the U.S., HealthCanada, Europe, Australia, Japan. Pretty much everybody is keeping up with security notices. There are some ISACs. There are the information security sectors. You need to be, it's strongly advised to participate so you can get that information over to you, and hopefully you can cut down on the cost because you might have to spend a lot of time and effort to do that. And I highlighted is that have a process to evaluate what is your exposure level for every vulnerability against your product line. So let's say you're running a certain operating system and it's common across 10 product families. Evaluate what is that risk, what's the exposure that you have because of a vulnerability. Maybe nothing, maybe very low. You may include it on the next update, but it's important to demonstrate and document that you thought about it, you've done the work, you understand what's the risk rating that is established as it pertains to your medical device. And then really, obviously, it's kind of the last point is the remediation is to be done according to the risk and the exposure itself. So this is kind of what the regulators will expect to see from you. Kind of what we've seen in the past, and I'm trying to get kind of a flavor of what we've seen collectively from different clients or different issues is one of the bigger one is really they don't have a hardware or software asset inventory. They don't know what's in their particular devices. And so it's a big issue because it's hard to evaluate if there's a risk if you don't know what you're running. You don't know what your OS is. You know what your hardware, your middleware, what version is running. So it's important to have that wherewithal. Really monitoring vendors and having a process to gather information from either ISACs or the federal government. That's a big no-no. Not prioritizing to the vulnerabilities, and we've seen it, and I've seen it firsthand that sales calls and says, "Oh my God, customer A is complaining that this happened," and everybody shifts to that one. Yet that is a low exposure rate with a low risk, and then we have a medium or high risk exposure that we're not doing anything about it. Lack of resources or willingness to mitigate known vulnerabilities. Quite a few companies, again, due to COVID, it might be a lesser of a enforcement as pertains to the FDA and other agencies, but from a submission standpoint, 510K, PMA, they want to see what you have done for known vulnerabilities. If you've done nothing, the FDA is expecting a trustworthy medical device, and other agencies for that matter. I'm using the FDA just because that's where a lot of the work comes through. A business decision, having outdated hardware and software in legacy medical devices that cannot tolerate patching. So, and we don't have a process to address that. So this is very, very big. It's a very big issue obviously for older devices, but the issue is not so much that they're outdated. The part is that we haven't done anything to really evaluate what is the risk. It's like, well, I can't patch it. I'm just sitting idle. And what happens is that the hospital will be forced to move it out of the operating unit. And then the last two is really about standards and understanding the different different elements. You might have a hardware group, a software group, and being able to combine those two and really understand kind of, I know to Jim's favorite topic of human factors is really understanding where the device is operating, what's the environment that is operating under, and really making sure that we have a process to identify that. Let's see, and then kind of the last slide, and again, trying to distill kind of what we've seen in the past probably 6 years, that since 2014 when the FDA or the regulatory agencies first start asking about cyber, it's just a known fact that everybody depends on a commercial and custom developed hardware and software for any medical device that runs software. It is inevitable. And I don't care what anybody will say, is that there are always going to be some vulnerabilities, either by accident, by default, or whatnot. Really, it's on us to understand that those can allow devices to be open to attacks, data breaches, for either what's going to under HIPAA or GDPR. Again, those mean dollars, those mean cost, or other cyber incidents. I mean, we had about a month ago, there was at least what the media alluded to was the first known directly attributed death to a cyber incident. I tend to disagree. I know there have been several others before that, that a person died because of a vulnerability in a medical device in Germany. So now BFARM is going to make everybody else's, kind of jump through hoops to make sure that that will not happen under their watch. But ultimately, those events will lead either to regulatory enforcement, FDA, EMA, BFARM, you name it, litigation, again, especially in the US, or credibility or customer loss. I mean, that's just something that comes with it. Really, our responsibility is that we need to understand those risks and address them in a well-defined, well-managed program within our QMS. It's not, as Jim said earlier, it's not that complicated. It's simply another process that we need to consider, but that's something that we need to do as part of this journey as we move forward more and more into automation and software running medical devices. With that being said, that was our last slide. If you have any questions, please free to answer those. Any questions, you can email myself or Ankit. With that being said, I have a couple brief introductions of Jim and myself, but it being said, Ankit, can you open up the, if we have any questions for us?
Yeah, so everyone, you can park your question in the comment section, and I will share it with Jim and John, and they will answer your queries. And you can also raise your hands, and I will unmute you. You can ask your question on the audio as well. John, we have few questions. I'm just
Sure.
transferring it to you. Yeah.
Whichever you want first.
John, can you see a question from Ajit?
Let's see. I don't see a question there, Ankit. Let's see. I'll make this bigger.
I'm not seeing them come in on my chat, but so if there's any that are directed towards me, you can just mention them aloud.
Yeah, or I can read the question. Ajit
Okay.
is asking, with the newer AI ML based devices with a learning algorithm, how do you ensure risk management is managed real time, and how do you manage risk design control?
We're talking about devices with AI and machine learning components.
Yeah,
It's the same process. It's the same process that when it comes to, to AI or machine learning, again, it's running code. So the expectation is really much the same. The expectation is that you go through and you evaluate those risks in the slides that we put together. Let me go back. Where is it? Here it goes. Here we go. Come on. So it's the same exact process. So what's your framework? Understand what is the intended use of that software as a medical device or a medical device itself, and then kind of go through and identify the hazards, jump into the hazard situations, but the process is still much the same. Does that answer the question?
What I'll add to that, presumably, and I'm less familiar with AI or machine learning, although I understand the concept. Presumably, you can anticipate ahead a little bit, having designed the system, in terms of the breadth that the machine learning or the AI could take. And so you want to anticipate those things with the risk management. But as John mentioned, I think it's very important because you may not know entirely where that machine learning is going to go in the long term. So you want to continually cycle back and update your risk management, update your anticipation, your predictions of where this machine learning, where this AI can go over time, and just try and stay a step ahead of it with the risk management.
And to that one, so the question just kind of came up. One key point from AI and machine learning, especially with software as medical devices, is that as of right now, there's not a unified process as it pertains to AI and ML for each country. So theoretically, the requirements that FDA has that might be, or not maybe, they are different that Europe will have, or Australia or Singapore or whatever else. So it's important to understand where exactly the device will be commercialized, because from an SiMD standpoint, the expectations are different, but they're not so much from the process. The design control process is the same. The requirements are different, is in terms of what they're asking to see from an architecture standpoint, from an output standpoint, and there are different ones for each country. And if you want, there's shoot me an email. There's some clear expectation from the FDA. The EMA published kind of their thoughts on AI and machine learning, and kind of slowly that trickles down to the corresponding countries. So there are some clear differences in terms of what each region is expecting, but the process is the same.
Okay, I'm assigning one more question to you, John.
Thank you, sir.
It is from Tarun. Yeah.
All right, let's see.
He is asking, what is the use of IEC 62304 in cybersecurity?
That's really just another standard to be used. I mean, there's several ones from an IEC is really just what, depending upon which region has adopted it, is really just the guide the medical device manufacturer on a particular area. But there are several, there's different flavors of standards you can use. You can use the ISO base, ISO and IEC. You can use the UL standards. The FDA, again, I want to remind folks, with Europe, they're more leaning, depending upon the country, from a testing standpoint, they're more leaning towards ISO and IEC. From an FDA standpoint, what they're looking for is NIST, is the NIST cybersecurity framework as the basis for the implementation. In Australia, they have their own cybersecurity framework. They're leaning, obviously, with their particular framework plus ISO or UL. So there's some other standards like AMI. There's an AMI standard cybersecurity, but really those are more to guide you through. Is really just evaluate what makes sense. Look back to what are those requirements that they need, and you can use whichever standard you deem is more suitable for your organization.
John, we have one more question from Tarun. He is asking, I want to know that can a software be a medical device, and how do we categorize that this software is a medical device?
Yeah, there is absolutely it's called an SiMD, software as a medical device. That's it can be either a diagnostic or a medical device, a standalone. So each region has a different decision criteria for how they define what is or what is not a medical device. HealthCanada has kind of a triage process. The FDA kind of goes through that, the same thing, asks specific questions. Now, there are some elements, as of right now, the FDA has deemed that some SiMD are medical devices, but they will take a discretionary enforcement, meaning that they know they're medical devices, but they're at this moment they choose not to enforce it. It's part of their process. Go ahead, Jim.
John, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think a very, very simple example of that, of software as a medical device, might be those of you who are familiar with Fitbit, or even an iPhone or an iWatch, I should say, something commercially available that's measuring your heartbeat. That would be diagnostic. Would that not be, John?
That is correct. That is a diagnostic, and the FDA, as of this moment, is taking the approach that they will not enforce the requirements for it. Now, in Europe, they're taking a little different approach, because at least I want to say is in some countries they take a different approach. So in Spain and Germany, the reimbursement of that usage is kind of the guiding factor as to what is an enforceable software medical device versus not. So if somebody wants to get paid for using or selling that product, irrespective of the risk, if it's low risk or high risk, that will be deemed a software as a medical device. If it's a low risk and they give it away for free, they will say, well, it's not, and you can keep using it. So it's just they're taking an approach from a monetary standpoint.
Thank you, John. And John, we have one more question. Avinash is asking, how do we validate the data on cloud?
What type of data? Well, you can't really validate data. I need to understand better. Data is really, we're talking about the process of generating data, because can we just ask that question?
I'm wondering, John, let's try this. I'm wondering if they mean the integrity of what's being stored there, not the data itself, but to know, just as you might have to validate an Excel spreadsheet, let's say, but to validate storage of information in the cloud. Might that be a fair interpretation?
I'm not sure. I mean, again, what I'm saying from a security standpoint, yeah. I mean, there's different ways you can demonstrate controls over how the data is being stored, and whether the data is encrypted, at rest, in transit, in use. But from a cloud standpoint, yeah, you can. It's from a CSV, from a software validation, yeah, you can do that fairly fairly easy to validate those controls and how the data is being addressed. Go ahead, Ankit.
Yeah, John, he is saying if we are just transferring some data on the cloud to how do we validate that the information with the data is proper? We
The
have
data
not
transfer?
lost anything. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
doing data transfer?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, at that point it depends if the data is encrypted or not. I mean that's a so we need to understand what's our let's assume we're doing an encryption and then we upload the data. So the easiest way is we have a hashing we'll do a hashing algorithm before and after, and then we have a simple data transfer verification on the once the data achieves or to the destination, to make sure that the availability, the integrity of the data itself was not impacted. So that's a simple activity. The other part is really if we're not transforming or repositioning or addressing the data itself, and it's a regulated system, and let's say it's a GXP system, we follow the standard, let's say GAM5 approach to make sure that the container itself is properly qualified to be a container of data, and then the process itself for bringing the data in is well established and validated. And then at that point, you do a hashing protocol to demonstrate that the integrity of that data itself was not impacted. And then if you want to do a sampling as a verification of that activity, you can as well. But the way that we would recommend someone to our clients is to you containerize the data itself, you hash it, you transport it, which whatever means you choose to do so, and then upon redeployment, you evaluate if there's any corruption of that data by evaluating the hashing algorithm, and then at that point you're good to go.
Okay, so John, we have one more question. We can take this one, and we can answer other questions.
I'm here all day. I'm all yours. I'm here all day, man.
Yeah, Shahina is asking which regulation we should comply before going with our software as a medical device in US market.
Really, the regulations are the same. Is strictly from a regulation standpoint, 21 CFR 820 is the underlying expectation from a medical device. The regulations don't change. The interpretation may change by each agency, but the regulatory framework is still the same.
Plus, there's various guidance documents underneath those regulations that get into specific aspects such as software and so forth.
Yeah, but listen, I think the part is with the US, there is going to be probably in the next, I would say 3 to 6 months, maybe less than that. I know they want to do it before EUMDR goes live. When the FDA requires that every manufacturer has a CBOM, that will be what will skyrocket or the demand for medical device cybersecurity practices and implementation. Is that right now they're taking the approach that they're only asking or probing cybersecurity as part of submissions, 510Ks, PMAs, updates. At the moment that they will be requiring CBOMs as they have said they will, and I was talking with the program director a couple of days ago. They're finalizing that one for the industry. That will really separate the wheat from the chaff for the companies that are ready versus the ones that are not ready. But it doesn't really matter because cybersecurity will be needed. If you sell in Europe with EU MDR, that is something that you have to have in place anyhow.
So, John, some of attendees were asking for a recorded version of our webinar. So let me tell you that we will share a recorded version of our webinar in a few hours to all our attendees, and we can share a soft copy of our webinar presentation as well. And you can ask your questions after this webinar as well on mine email ID or John. John, can you share the contact slide so that
Sure.
attendees can note?
It's in, it's over here. So either myself or Ankit or Jim, I didn't have time to put yours on, but
If you have a question for me, email it to John or Ankit, and they can forward it to me very easily, and I'd be happy to address any questions you have.
Yeah. And at the end, I will be sharing, I will take 2-3 more minutes, and I will share some polls for feedback on our webinar so that we can improve our webinar quality.
Would you apologize for the difference in the with on the timing? I think it was just with the time change, it was just kind of threw everybody out of whack there. But listen, it was fun. We're here to help.
Yeah.
Said both Jim and I have been doing this for a while now. I don't know, collectively probably about 70 years now. But it's really important. It's really fun. Again, it's not the hard. It's not the hard, but it's really goes back to having a process, understanding, and really I can't emphasize this anymore that I'm doing right now. Is really you have to understand your device. You have to understand how your device operates and which environment that device operates. I've seen organizations that claim to understand their device, but to one of Jim's favorite topics, human factors engineering, is that never thought of that particular device being in an environment where it would be susceptible to attacks, and this is and came back and addressed. I'm sorry.
2 words.
Yes.
2 words. Foreseeable misuse.
It's true, but that foreseeable aspect. It's so hard. I mean, people can conceptualize misuse, but the foreseeable part, it's really what it's kind of gets folks kind of down.
Yeah, so I will share a few polls. The first one is here. That will help us to increase our webinar quality next time. If you want more webinars from John, then you should say very good or good, and he will be back for you. Yeah, this is the next one. If you want us to reach out to you to solve your problems and to resolve your queries, you can say yes, and we will be reaching out to you. If you want more webinars from CyberActa and Saraca, you can just say yes, and we will be there for you. This question is related to for what we were here. That will be really helpful for us.
Mm-hmm.
And our next poll is on our next webinar. Okay, so guys, you can reach out on John's email ID or you can reach out to me with your questions. We will to solve your questions and your problems related to cybersecurity. And thank you, John, and thanks a lot, Jim, for being there and spreading good values with our attendees.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Aniket. Thanks,
you very
everybody.
much.
Waiting.
Bye.
Okay, bye-bye.